Hello, everyone. Welcome to Where's the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. I am Sabrina and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Jane. Jane, how are you doing?
I'm good. I feel like we haven't talked in a while. What the latest is, as you know, I got married. I am a married woman, a new woman.
Yeah,
So
congrats.
thank you. Life has just
Congrats.
been so busy. How are you, Sabrina?
Yeah, I definitely can't top that. So it's just been such a pleasure to actually attend your wedding and witness you and Kyle tie the knot. And there was so much love, and I get chills just like thinking back about it. It was just absolutely perfect.
Oh,
I
thank
hope it was
you.
for you because it was for
It was so good. I feel cheesy because every bride or every woman will also always say like it was the perfect day. It was the best day. And like I truly got to experience that for myself. And yeah, it just was such a loving day. So thank you for being there. That said, I am actually very excited about today because we have another special guest.
We absolutely do, indeed. I'm very excited about the guest, about the topic. And the topic at first glance may not seem the most sexiest, if you will. I think it's one that our society kind of avoids talking about. And it's one of those where when it doesn't concern you, you don't want to talk about it, but until it really hits you in the face. And speaking from personal experience, I didn't have to deal with it until recently when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And our guest also has some personal experiences that she'll touch upon. But I think what's really critical here to know today for our audience, it's the topic of care, right? Like what happens when you're faced with providing care for our family members, when as our parents get older, as our society in general gets older, our relatives, our family members, what is the right type of care? What do you even do? Where do you begin? What are some of the resources that you can turn to? And also, most importantly, what are some of the expectations, right? I think also from a cultural standpoint, there's so many nuances in what I would want to do for my family, for my parents, what is expected of us, right? But also, how do you set those boundaries? So I think even though it may not affect everyone right now, really importantly for today, everyone may be in different stages of their life, right? And many people may not have to deal with this at this very moment. However, it is one that all of us will have to deal with as our parents get older, as many of our loved ones get older. So, and with all of our podcast topics, there is no right or wrong, right? There's a lot of gray in here. And again, there may be different approaches to different things, but I couldn't be more excited to have our special guest on. I'm so honored to call Shannon a really good friend of mine, but Shannon is also someone that has always inspired me personally. So for some background, Shannon Gatos is a Fortune 50 global talent strategist. So Shannon has held various positions at large organizations. She's also a writer. She wrote the book, The 2030 Papers. I highly recommend you going on Amazon and checking it out. It's about how tech, debt, and aging will change the way we learn, work, and die. She's a speaker and founder of the 2050 Project. She also has a website called Caring Up that she'll talk about later on. She's a futurist and a thought leader. She writes and speaks on the future of work on LinkedIn, Erie Media, and other forums. As well as she's an avid traveler. She has visited over 60 countries, lived in Japan, Argentina, and Chile. I had the pleasure of visiting many of those countries with Shannon, and so excited to have you on. Hi, Shannon. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sabrina. Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for having me. And what an introduction. You're making me feel very important today.
Well, you are. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What do you like our audience to know about you, and what made you passionate about this topic in particular?
Sure. So I think you touched on a few things already. One, I am a world traveler. Well, I consider myself to be one. So I have visited over 60-ish countries at this point. Kind of had a hiatus for the past few years for obvious reasons of things going on in the world in the COVID epidemic. But I continue, planning to continue on picking that back up this year and next. So I am a proud aunt to 3 young boys. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my nephews, my sister, and my brother-in-law, as well as my dad and stepmom live here too. So I have not always been here. I am a Michigan State Spartan, so I like to make that differentiation for all you Wolverine fans out there. Even though I'm in Ann Arbor, I am a Spartan for life, so go green. And overall, yeah, I am very passionate about talent strategy, of course, because that is my line of work, but on a personal level, and just, I think, from a future perspective, really interested in caring and aging, the aging population, and what the trends are in that space, and kind of what we can do as individuals and as society to improve the future and improve the state of the world, kind of based on some of those trends. So Sabrina, you mentioned the book. Thank you. So the 2030 papers, it does have a number of sections on various topics, including finances, money, aging, of course, being one, and death, birth. So kind of a lot of stuff thrown in there. But what I would highlight today is the aging section. So if you do have a curiosity about what the future may look like, there's kind of some good nuggets in there, and some kind of creative monikers that I came up with. So I had fun writing it, and I am happy to be here today to talk about some of the trends and thoughts and my own personal experiences with caregiving.
Amazing. Yeah. And that is truly inspiring, how you take certain topics that society may not want to talk about as much, right? And you really shed light on some of the issues and how we can address and get prepared for the future. So on that note, Shannon, in your book, in the aging chapter, there are some really daunting stats. So if I may quote, for instance, the share of the global population over 60 will double by 2050. And population aging is poised to become one of the most significant social transformations of the 21st century. So all to say, even though that may not be all that surprising, I don't think, again, like our society really talks about that enough. So in your experience, as we're dealing with aging populations, aging parents, family members, or even just family members getting sick, what has been your experience with that, and what prompted you sort of to layer in? So you have that personal experience, right? And you have these like overarching statistics, but tell us a little bit more about, what got you really into that, or what was that firsthand experience that you had, and how you then also wrote the book about that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess focusing on the care space, when I was 11, my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And at the time, so not to date myself, but this was in the early 90s, and there weren't a lot of research options available. You couldn't just go on the internet and look up what is multiple sclerosis easily. You couldn't go on a Facebook group or on Instagram or some other social media channel and find people in your age group or even older, or anybody, to kind of form a coalition and understand what is going on. So I kind of fumbled my way through, the next 30 or so years. Unfortunately, my mother did pass away about 4 years ago now, after that, 30-year struggle with multiple sclerosis. But I learned a lot during that time that I think will benefit and inform a lot of the population, either now or in the future. When you think about that statistic, so between now and the year 2050, the 60 plus, 65 plus senior population is going to double. So that doubles, really doubles the chances that you may have a loved one, a grandparent, even a parent, relative, older relative, or somebody that a neighbor perhaps, that is going to be experiencing some of the challenges of aging, whether it be dementia or Alzheimer's or other diseases that are more common as we get older. Now, I will say probably a lot of what we'll talk about today may also apply to people more in my shoes, or perhaps in your shoes, Sabrina, where you're at a younger age, but your parent or older relative or whoever it may be that is older than you is experiencing extreme challenges, whether it be chronic illness or something like that. So this subject really touches a lot of people at different phases in their life. And to your point earlier, I don't think we talk about it enough. I don't think we're talking about this topic of care and how to care and where do you go to learn more, and make sure you're doing things right and all that kind of stuff. So that was my kind of lifelong experience on the topic. But really what I'm trying to do is open the door on the conversation and share some of the things that I've learned.
Yeah, amazing. And it's just so true how, yeah, it won't, and to your point about, it's not just about aging, right? It's about illnesses that can occur at any point in time. And for me, I mean, no one expected that, right? That my 58-year-old dad would get diagnosed with cancer. And so it's just something that we have to be prepared for at all times. And adding in the layer of, you didn't even know what resource you could go to at that time when it hit you. So now I guess we have the privilege of having more resources, but even with technology being more of a connector, there's still just probably just so many millions of questions. So I love how you're creating that platform and that space for people to actually engage in the conversation and to learn from, unfortunately, very tragic experiences.
I know one of the things that you mentioned, Shannon, is just the fact that people don't necessarily talk about this. It's so interesting too, because I feel like the three of us have had such different experiences with caring for, whether that be elderly, like our parents, or someone in our lives. I know you shared your experience supporting your mom over years of both of your lives, and Sabrina, you shared that this is more of a recent thing for you, caring for your dad. And I think for me, I've been so fortunate to have both of my parents still relatively healthy, and this not being something that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? It's not the most top of mind concern for me. And so while this is something that sometimes it's kind of difficult to talk about, it's not always easy to talk about it, Sabrina and I realize it's something we should be having conversation around now, sooner rather than later, so that people are prepared to have these conversations with their family, so that people are know how to set these boundaries when they do have to deal with this. One of the questions that we had for you is just, we would love to learn more about kind of your experience caring for your mom, and how you and your sister, like, how did you guys manage, and what are some of the maybe even tips and tricks that you found? Like you mentioned, there weren't as many resources. So how was that experience for you and like the rest of your family?
Yeah, sure. So I think over time, when things progressed where to a point where my mom needed care beyond my sister and myself. So in the beginning, for the first decade or so, I would say we managed largely with ourselves, neighbors, and friends helping out. So we were very fortunate to live in a great community. It's called Allen Park, and it's outside of Detroit, Michigan. So if anybody from Allen Park is listening, shout out. But we had some very supportive neighbors, friends, people that would come over, bring a meal, help my mom eat, help with things around the house, do yard work for free, things like this. So I'll touch on kind of some resources later, but I do have on my website, the 2050project.org, a number of articles that may help you if you're kind of in the earlier stages of caregiving. One of the topics is building that community. So, kind of advice on how to work well with your siblings. What I have seen with myself and others is typically there will be one sibling who kind of takes on the primary caregiving role, and kind of I guess the task manager, the project manager almost, who's figuring out, when help is needed, what time of day, what days of the week, are there appointments to get to, can the person you're caring for drive? Do they need transportation? All of these things. There's also a financial aspect. So, I have a couple of articles on that, in kind of how to talk to your family and others about finances and kind of budgeting and what might be needed for care now and in the future. Like if the situation is going to get worse and you're going to have to pay caregivers to come in, what might that look like? So we kind of, as I said, fumbled our way through some of these things. My goal is to really get more information out to people so that they don't have to, do all of this by trial and error. I will say there are a lot of even just Facebook groups and groups on Instagram now where you can basically type in just caregiving, or maybe a specific thing that you need help with, such as a parent with ALS or Alzheimer's, something like that.
Mhm.
And you can get a lot of great tips just from the online community. That has been a huge help to me. That was a huge help to me in later years. I would say from 2010 on, just having those communities available. I'll say, prior in the 90s and late 90s, early 2000s, I would desperately search message boards or Google in its infancy to try to find resources. And I would always come up with the same message threads, month after month. There just wasn't much out there, and it was very hard to search things really before Google. So
Right.
the good news is, hopefully today you don't have to, folks in this situation have a lot more at their fingertips, and, they can feel more supported.
Yeah. And thank you for doing that for people who maybe have not gone through this and don't even know where to go. I feel like having just resources readily available, exactly to your point, when you were going through this, there was nothing to even search, let alone rely on and build that community. So I think the fact that we now have resources, or have people like you who have gone through it and is sharing your experiences and sharing your resources, that's incredible to even just begin with. The one thing I would love to hear from both of your perspectives is around cultural differences. And the reason, and this is very top of mind for me, so even though I personally haven't gone through caring for my family yet, it is very top of mind and subconsciously something I constantly think about. So I'm Chinese American. I grew up primarily in Beijing, and we moved to America, but my family and my cultural upbringing is still very Chinese. And as I think about how I should take care of my family, it's very much expected to care for your elders. And I know oftentimes, even currently in China, the culture is you don't put your parents or elderly in these care facilities or elderly care. You yourself are expected to take care of your parents. And I'm using parents as just one example. This applies to others in your life as well. But the reality is, just socially things have changed, right? Previously, people had many siblings that you can kind of share that responsibility. And I know, Shannon, you kind of shared how you collaborated with your sister to make this happen. But, coming into my generation and even the generation before me, oftentimes people are in one child policy. So you have one child expected to take care of not only your own kids, but now your parents as well. So yeah, I mean, I've kind of said enough there, but that's the upbringing and the education that I've had growing up. Would love to hear, like, Sabrina and Shannon, your perspectives on this.
Honestly, I will say that I'm very, very grateful for having a brother to go through this, or a sibling to go through this with. Before my dad passed away, like, it was very much so, like, you could have there was options. You could have the hospice. Obviously, Germany is known for their great healthcare and all of that, but my dad didn't want that. So, and we'll get into that a little bit more, like, around like parents' preferences and how to deal with all of that. How about you, Shen? How was that for you with your sister? And
So I'm thinking about a generalization here, but I'd like to throw this out there. So from a cultural perspective, it's so interesting to hear from the Chinese perspective, from the German perspective. From an American perspective, I had long felt prior to COVID-19, I will say that Americans were more prone than other cultures to go the route of the nursing home or the care facility, or for various reasons. And I have seen a lot of research on this topic. One reason being, in the US, a lot of times, yes, it is a very individualistic culture, but children tend to spread out more over time. They could be across the country, they could be across the world. And so I think in some cases it's viewed, or has been viewed, as easier, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, to just put mom and dad, or mom or dad or grandma or grandpa in a facility, and they'll take care of them there and it'll be great. Well, I had an experience with my grandfather when I was young. I was about 18, 19, and he had dementia and he was experiencing some issues there. So my mom, having multiple sclerosis at the time, was, it was difficult for her to care for him. My grandmother had passed away. And although he lived in our city, it came to the point where we thought that the best option would be to put him in a nursing home facility. And he was there, I would say, less than 6 months and passed away. We had a very poor experience there. And I guess the generalization that I'm going to make is, I feel that post COVID-19, in this kind of post-pandemic world, that America may be shifting its perspective on nursing homes, having seen kind of the bad side of things throughout the past couple of years, and kind of the worst of the worst, and seeing all the stories and about everything's going on in these places. Now, I'm not going to say don't put your parent in an assisted living facility, or your older relative, or whoever it may be. I'm not going to say that, because there are definitely some great places. But in the case of, my sister and I, again, usually one sibling will step up and kind of take the lead. And that was definitely my sister. So my sister and my brother-in-law moved my mom into their house. So for the last 4 years of her life, she lived with them. They had just bought their first home, and were fortunate enough to find one actually with a handicap accessible room, almost like a mother-in-law suite in the back, with a bathroom and handicap accessible shower and everything. So I think that this term called aging in place, or just basically trying to keep people at home when it's difficult for them to be at home, is going to be a trend that we see really blowing up in the next 10, 20 years. And I'm really hopeful about that, because I think again, in America, people don't necessarily want to put their loved one into a facility somewhere else, or assisted care, whatever. They want to keep them at home, but it's difficult sometimes if you don't have the right checks and balances in place. Like, there's technology nowadays, and I talk about this in a chapter in the book and on my site, where you can monitor the home for trips, falls. You can monitor their health. Like, there's all these different things that you can do. Care bots, there's these little robots that are coming up. in growing in popularity, and they can kind of check in on the person. So one other thing I would add, reflecting on my time in Japan, is that from an aging elderly population perspective, I noticed very early on in my time there, and I lived in Japan in 2012, 2013 for about 18 months, but I noticed how respected the elderly population was. And a lot of people did, they would take care of their parent until the very end, or their grandparent until the very end. That was viewed as their responsibility. And so I kind of came back from that experience looking at things through a different lens, and kind of how we view aging and care in America. So that is a topic that I would like to explore kind of further, in my research and in what I write about, is how to tailor to different cultures in these conversations.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to have these different cultural aspects of it. And I agree that our Western society could maybe benefit from some of those traits, and like how you treat elderly and how you care for them. Because I'm going to be honest, when I first found out about my dad, like I was struggling, right? Like he lives thousands of miles away, and what is the right type of care? What are the expectations? And for the American society to be more inclined to send them off to a nursing facility, that was also my first inkling, if I'm being really honest. So I really like how obviously you're also huge kudos to your sister and all the things that she has been doing, and her husband, for your mom. On that note, obviously that's tremendous, like all this work that's going into that, right? And having your mom close, but also making sure that you are setting those boundaries without losing yourself, right? Like so can you share a little bit more about that aspect, the emotional aspect? I mean, it's got to be such an emotional burden also for you and for your sister, right? As you see your mom, you just want her to be better, but you see her struggle, and like, how do you make sure that you balance the grief and the sorrow while still being expected to be strong and care for your mom? So if you could share more about that.
Yeah, great question. And I think I can only be honest here, and maybe not hiding the reality of it, like I used to do. So I would say while my sister and I were going through caring for my mother, and watching her, lose mobility over time and get to a point where she was completely paralyzed with MS, I would kind of pretend like things were okay. A lot of us in the family did, and friends would ask, maybe, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help? And I would usually say no. My sister was more open with her friends and the people she talked to, and when people asked if they could help, she would say yes. So she would have friends come to the house just to keep my mom company if nobody was going to be home. She would take people up on offers to go to the grocery store. And one tip I would say, if you're in a situation where you do need extra help, one, don't be afraid to ask people. Two, I would say, take people up on offers if they do offer. I find for the most part, people don't know how they can help. They want to help, but they just don't know how. So assigning them something specific is really helpful. Like, hey, I could use a trip to CVS or the grocery store. That would be really helpful. Could you do that once a month? Something like that. And then probably the third thing I would say is, if you find good caregivers, so you have people that you're paying either through like a care.com or maybe some other type of job posting, I would say try to keep those folks. Good caregivers can be hard to find, and they also usually know other good caregivers, so always ask for referrals. I'll give you an example. We built out a little army of care towards the end of the last few years. And that was from a neighboring college. So Eastern Michigan University was about 5-10 miles away from my sister's house. And we ended up having, I think, between 4 and 6, I'm trying to remember, 4 and 6 nursing students from the school. Some were nursing students, some were friends of the nursing students. And we rotated them around for a few years through the shifts, and they were great. Very eager to help, eager to learn. So if you have the opportunity to tap into any kind of schools or universities near you, I would definitely recommend that, because there are a lot of nursing and doctoral students and things like this looking for experience.
I really like, Shannon, your comment around, or even the tactic of being very specific with people on what you actually need and being like open about it. And I know it's not as easy as we say, but one of the things that I have learned, and especially moving to America too, is just there's this notion of like it takes a village, right? Like we generally, when we talk about that, is oftentimes for caring for children or raising like younger generation, but it actually applies too for taking care of your family or even elderly. I feel that a lot of times, and maybe this even goes back to this broader notion of like it's kind of taboo to talk about this. People don't really, it's uncomfortable to talk about care for your family's future. But the more we talk about it, I think the more it becomes normalized, and the more you're more likely to actually understand what other people might be going through. And I can even share a really good example, a personal example too. We had a family, and this was actually their son, but it's kind of a similar situation where they like needed help. They were frequently in the hospital caring for their son, and we honestly had no idea how to help them. Like we were sympathetic and we checked in on them. We like, verbally were there, but physically we were not close to them, and we had no idea how to help them. And eventually they like gave us very tactical things. They said, like, can you send us DoorDash to this location? Can you send us like meal prep, companies, or like, it's very, very tactical. And in a way, it not only helps them, right? Because now they have food and things are a little bit easier for them, but like selfishly, it made me feel so much better too. I genuinely felt like I had a way to help them beyond just talking and asking how they're doing. So I really want to double down on your recommendation of like not only being open about it, but giving people very clear requests on what they can do, because a lot of times people, number one, don't know how to help, but number two, like sometimes just like don't want to push or don't want to overstep that boundary. So the more clear you can be, the better help you will actually receive. So that's wonderful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, take time for yourself, especially if you are in a primary caregiver situation where you are, you may be burning the candle at both ends, working, raising a family, taking care of a family member or friend. And I often read in these groups that I'm a part of and in articles and things, people do not want to take time for themselves. They feel like they are always on, they have to always be helping. So if someone does offer help, again, I would really recommend taking them up on it, and don't feel guilty about that. I have felt guilt over my world travels, and every time I would come back from somewhere to go, visit my mom at my sister's house, I would feel an extreme sense of guilt and almost remorse or sadness. Like, why am I out doing this, doing these things, taking this time for myself when I should probably be here? And my mom would always say, your sister and Adam, her husband, are taking care of me. I'm fine here. We have our army of caregivers. And she didn't want me to, she didn't want everyone in her life to put their life on hold to care for her. I think that would have made her very unhappy. So yeah, there's a lot to think about. And one other thing I would add is in the realm of your job or your career, I've seen that again, kind of in this post-pandemic world, things are changing, and people have become more open about talking about these situations. Like, hey, I need a couple of days or a couple of hours even off to take, my mom or my maybe my child who has cerebral palsy to an appointment, and I think in the past it was more taboo to talk about these things. You would just say, I have an appointment or I need some time off. But I think it's helping by opening up the door with your situation, even a little bit, may make others on the team or in your life more comfortable saying, oh, well, hey, actually, I have this situation at home too. I totally understand what you're going, or I may understand what you're going through, things like that. So I would just say, don't keep things all inside. That was a major thing I learned throughout my life. And I wish I had started kind of speaking out about these things sooner and connecting with people sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can totally imagine that caring for, whether that be an elderly, someone in your family, or even children, oftentimes can have its toll on like people's mental health and the ability to take care of themselves. And oftentimes this sense of guilt or the sense of obligation sometimes actually guilts people into stretching themselves to the point where they can't take care of themselves anymore. And one of the things Sabrina and I were talking about prior to this conversation too is just finding the balance between caring for yourself and caring for this other person, because oftentimes you'll find yourself in a situation where, because of your own mental health and your own even physical health is not at a good place, you're not able to provide the best care for this other person that you want to support. So very, very important to call that out as well. The other thing that's very top of mind for us too is just care comes in many different forms, right? Like we talked about giving direct care to family, having nursing homes and all these different options, but also we talked about having family, friends, neighbors, your community supporting you as a sense of care as well. Shannon, from your experience, and Sabrina, even from yours, do you guys think that there's such a thing as too much care, or is there a time or place for you to step back from caring for someone?
I think it's a great question, because the only person that can really tell you if they're feeling kind of overburdened or like dawdled over is the person you're giving care for. And oftentimes they don't even know. They may not know how they're feeling or what's even happening. It depends, on the situation. I will say, like in the case of my mom, she did not want a lot of help in the beginning. And so this would be, when she first started having to use a cane or a walker, and she would not want any help at all, and would do things like try to go down the stairs still, or, to maybe do some laundry at our house in Allen Park. Try to walk distances further than maybe she should or could be. So there were situations where, she would fall. So, many other people may be experiencing this. With my grandfather, it was driving. So I know that a typical situation for the elderly population is you get to a point where your vision may not be good enough to drive, or your mental health may not be good enough. And so you do have to, in terms of where is the line, you kind of have to cross a line as the family member or the person responsible to take the keys away, or to tell the person, like in my mom's situation, hey, you might need to be more careful. Maybe you shouldn't go down the stairs anymore. That's something that I can do. I can do the laundry. I can do these things. And it's a very delicate balance. You kind of have to prepare for backlash or anger from the individual. There are certainly probably situations where you may not realize that you're stepping over the line, or you're kind of babying the situation almost. And so, again, I think it's a matter of patience, keeping open conversation, just knowing that there may be some conflicts, and some arguments along the way, but overall trying to strike that balance of keeping the person safe, keeping the household, the situation safe, and kind of your own mental health, as we've discussed, and knowing when to step back. I think for me, there were situations in which it was clear that I had tried to do too much and was taking away independence where it didn't need to be, making decisions maybe that I should have involved my mom in and didn't. And so I would say, to any listeners here in this podcast, just kind of be cognizant of those things and try to put yourself in the individual's shoes, even if you're tired and, everything else that goes along with it.
Yeah, that's so well said, Shannon. And I don't have much to add there, but definitely just dealing with handling the situation with compassion, right? Like listening to the person while also striking that balance of, okay, maybe here is where you shouldn't do this anymore. And it's okay for you to not having to do this anymore, right? Like, let us take care of you. But definitely it's tough. Like that was part of the hardest things, to just watch my dad not being able to get up by himself anymore, and for him to really take that to heart, and him feeling really weak and crying. And it's really tough, right? But just all you can do is like handle that with compassion and be there for them. And yeah, but also you have to fill your own cup first before you help them, right? So that's just, that's a life reminder for all of us. But thank you, Shannon. That was beautifully said. So with that, we are at time almost. So any other last recommendations for someone that may be new? You already gave a lot of great resources, I know, also online and some of the Facebook groups that you mentioned. Anything that you would like to give a plug on for someone that may be new to this?
Yeah, sure. So for those looking for more information on kind of caregiving and where to start, whether you're just starting, you're in the middle, you've been doing it for years, I do think care.com is a really good resource for finding caregivers. If you really don't know where to start, you don't have kind of any of those neighbors or friends to help, I would start there. There's also caregiver.com, which can be helpful in terms of content. And AARP, many people think of AARP as, just that website for seniors. But from a caregiver perspective, it really has a lot of content that you can access. And much of it is free if you just go to their website, so aarp.org. And then, as I mentioned, my website is the 2050 Project, so the 2050project.org. I'm kind of in the process of rebranding, but I do have a number of articles up there and resources, including some of the technology kind of enhancements that I mentioned that are helping folks stay at home, aging in place, and staying safe and healthy. And then you can also follow me on at Caring Up on Instagram. So caring_up on Instagram. And yeah, I just, in terms of final words, just thank you for having me here. This has been a really great experience, and I'm just happy to open up the conversation and hopefully help some folks out there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Before we even close, I had no idea about AARP, so I'm learning a lot even just through this conversation. So thank you so much. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close this out here. Thanks everybody for listening. We would love to hear from you if you guys have any ideas for other topics we want to talk about, or if you want to reach out to Shannon yourself, you can always reach us at where'sthelinepod@gmail.com, and make sure you subscribe anywhere that you're listening. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.